Where did the newscast come from? And the simple answer is 19th century French science fiction. Two great books, Le Monde tel qu'il sera, which is The World as It Shall Be by Émile Souvestre in 1846, and Le XXe siècle, which is the 20th century by Albert Robida in 1882. So, is this the 35th anniversary of the 24-hour news cycle? CNN started in 1980. No, it's the 169th anniversary of the 24-hour news cycle. And that's in Souvestre's book. Now, they didn't even have very much telegraph at the time, let alone telephone or any other technology. So his 24-hour news cycle technology is a newspaper. And the newspaper runs on rollers, and it goes throughout town, and if you're not a subscriber, then you try to read it as it zips past. But if you are a subscriber, there are enough spring-loaded rollers in your home that you can read things at your leisure as they go by, but still to see the articles that you want. They're coded according to whatever your political preference is. And by the way, as is the case with many science fiction innovations, it followed closely on a real-world invention, and that was the invention of continuous roll wood pulp in 1844. Here's an audio newscast in 1882 in the 20th century, Chapter 3, and this woman is awakened by the newscast. Verbana, 11 p.m. His Majesty the King of Senegambia was assassinated minutes ago. Dynamite bombs and electric torpedoes were launched into the palace. They also have the television news, and what I really like about this one, it's the same book, and it's high definition. Look at the aspect ratio, it's 16:9. Injured correspondents become the story, just as they do today. But a difference is libel complaints are settled by duels. And there's the Bloommobile of 1882. It's covering desert warfare, handheld camera, one-person crew. There's clear press marking there, so that indicates non-combatant status. But of course, you do need very long cords for the camera and the microphone. The source of the idea, again, science fiction things are based on actual things that happened. It was in 1881. This is a picture that appeared in the graphic. This is at the First International Electricity Congress in Paris, and they were sending plays and operas to the Electricity Congress over telephone lines, and they were doing it in stereo, so people were listening with hands up on both ears. And Robida was definitely influenced by that. The first actual newscast, 1893 in Budapest, Hungary, and the guy who actually worked on this 1881 system, one of the guys, Tivadar Puskás, he designed the system for Budapest. He died just before it went into operation, and they hired 6 people called stentors to read into telephone wires, but they were a full news operation, editors, news desks, and so on. And then they would play music when the news wasn't happening. The first television newscast, 1928, regularly scheduled television newscasts by Colin Hager over WGY in Schenectady, New York. And that's him posing with a bunch of the microphones used from various dates. But even in 1928, there were much older live remote visual sportscasts. So how did that happen? Here's a guy, Bob Lemon, when he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1976 as part of his speech. So he was born in September, and that was 1920. And my mother had to see the World Series at the old Opera House in Redlands, California. And in those days, they didn't have baby sisters. They had clothes baskets, so they put old Lem in a clothes basket, and they went to see the World Series. I was probably about 6 weeks old. So how did they watch the World Series in 1920? Well, in fact, as far back as 1884, people would go to theaters to experience live remote baseball games. There were 3 telegraph operators. One of them would telegraph the plays, another one would announce what the plays were at the theater, and the third one would move some visual element around. Initially it was flags on a board indicating the players. But then it started getting more complex. So in 1888 it was pins. In 1889 the pins would move around, and you can see this guy's that far off the base and this guy's farther off the base. 1891 electricity was added. Here's a newsreel clip, and this is just going to repeat over and over. It's only a 5-second clip. I'll play it over and over. But you can see the runners moving around, where the ball is going. The reason that this clip exists, by the way, it was thrown out in a trash dump, but the trash dump was in the Yukon Territory where it was really cold. And so the Canadian Archives found it. It was in reasonable condition, and they restored it, and so now you can see it. By 1894, they started using androids. This was a system supposed to be able to be operated by one person. And you can see there's little light bulbs where the gloves are, and that's how you could tell where the ball was. The glove would light up if it was the one that had the ball. And here's a report in the Richmond, Virginia Times talking about, I declare they looked positively handsome when he knocked that home run. And here's something from the Arizona Daily Star in Tucson saying, even in 1931, come to the Opera House to watch the World Series between the Phillies and St. Louis. So, I think that covers me, and are there any questions?
Two questions. One about what you were just showing. Do you have any sense of what sort of, was that a viable business at all? Like how much money was put into developing all these different ways of doing remote baseball, and the people really watched it and it worked?
It was an extremely viable business. Into the 1930s, what killed it was not television but radio, because radio finally got good enough. The first game to be broadcast on radio so that civilians could hear it was in 1921, and it was in Pittsburgh on KDKA, and the announcer was a guy by the name of Harold Arlen, L-I-N, not L-E-E-N, not the composer, and he announced the game the way he thought, which was when there was a pitch, he said, "What happened?" And then he shut up. And he later said, "Nobody told me I was supposed to talk between pitches." So the radio broadcast was extremely boring, but if you went to one of these theaters, by 1886 they had worked out the choreography of the sportscast. So maybe in 1884 they said, "And it's a good pitch, and he hits it." Well, by 1886 they were saying, "And it's a high fly, and it's out to Dalrymple!" And the Detroit Opera House erupts in applause. But yes, extremely lucrative. There were 44 U.S. patents that were issued for a bunch of the display systems, and lawsuits over the patent rights would go as high as the Supreme Court.